moderator for today's session, organized by Juris Jura. Juris Jura is an organization that always endeavors to get you benefited in the best possible way in legal learning and to create legal awareness all along and to showcase your hidden talents through various events. So, now let's begin with the session. Our topic for today is an overview of insolvency and bankruptcy code. The laws relating to insolvency and bankruptcy in the earlier centuries were framed for penalizing the defaulting debtors. Over the years, there has been improvising change in the global regulatory framework towards the corporate insolvency. The principal focus of the modern insolvency legislation is not liquidation and elimination of the insolvent entities, but on the renovation of the financial and organizational structure of debtors experiencing the financial distress so as to permit the rehabilitation and continuation of their business. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any kind of questions during the session, please raise your hand during the question and answer session at the end. I'll let you get your answers. Kindly attend the session throughout and we shall be providing you the feedback link after the session itself. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our esteemed panelists. Our speakers for today are Mr. Devashish Tiwari sir and Ms. Ayushi Agarwal ma'am. Mr. Devashish Tiwari sir is an advocate practicing before Bombay High Court and other forums. He hails from Chhattisgarh and has pursued BSL LLB course from ILS Law College, Pune. He is currently working as an associate with Naik and Company, Mumbai in its dispute resolution team. Prior to joining Naik and Company, he has worked as an associate with Sardul Amarchand and Mangaldas and Company, New Delhi, and Converse Law, Mumbai. He has diverse experience in representing corporate giants of retail, banking and IT sector before High Courts of Delhi, Bombay and Bilaspur, subordinate courts and other tribunals. Before proceeding towards the next speaker, I, on behalf of the team, is very much obliged to have Devashish sir for today's session, as despite of his ill health, he has joined us, which shows his responsibility towards his work. Our team really appreciate for taking your time out for imparting knowledge to the young minds, for enlightening their knowledge. Thank you so much, sir. We are highly obliged to you. And next, the next speaker is Ms. Ayushi Agarwal, has completed her BBLLB honors with a specialization in business law from NMINS Kirit P. Mehta School of Law, Mumbai in the year 2019 with a strong academic record. Besides working as a corporate lawyer, she is preparing for a final exam for the company secretary course with ICSI. Having successfully graduated, she began her career with the general corporate team of Globe Legal, Mumbai, where she regularly advises clients on matters and transactions involving company law, banking, employment, and mergers and acquisition. Before being associated with Globe Legal, she has had the opportunity to explore and experience working in many other sectors of law through her internships with the top law firms, including Khaitan and Company, J. Sagar Associates, and Desai and Divanshi. She was enrolled as an advocate with the Bar Council of Maharashtra and Goa in 2019. So now, let's get started with the discussion further. So my question to you, Devashish sir. So what was the objective of implementing this code?
Am I audible?
Yes, sir, yes.
At the outset, I'm highly overwhelmed by the response that I can see here. I think it's more than 248 speakers. That too on Sunday. It's a great pleasure for me. And thanks, that's kind of you, the team of Juris Jura, to have such a wonderful presentation and introduction. Now coming to this quote, it's made up of two words. It's called insolvency and bankruptcy. And I can smell that most of the lawyers that are here are more prone or more interested in the field of human rights, constitutional law, criminal law. So I'll request everyone for just 1 hour to see this, to become a banking and finance lawyer and see from that perspective how a commercial law works. Now, since we will talk about the objective of this code. So first of all, let's understand what is the meaning of the word insolvency and bankruptcy. So I'll give you an example. Suppose I'm one of the leading company in India, and I have taken a loan from my co-speaker Ayushi and Vidya and the organizer here, who are also a great company. And suppose tomorrow my liabilities are so to that, like that liabilities are so much more than my assets, and your of I can experience some disturbance on the background. Yeah, hello.
Yeah, Devashish, I think we lost you in the middle.
Hello. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yeah. So a position when I'm unable to pay my debt, not because of any dispute, but because my liabilities are so much that more than my assets. So that position will be called an insolvency. And the process that will follow by which you all can recover a debt, that will be called a bankruptcy. So insolvency is a state and bankruptcy is the process. Now tomorrow, if all you creditors wanted to recover a money from myself, so what will be the process? Like what should be the remedy that you can do? Either you can go to a civil court, or if you're a bank, you can go to a special court called DRT, and or if there's an arbitration clause, you can approach an arbitral tribunal so that you can recover your money. But this whole code is not a recovery mechanism. This is a mechanism to revive a company which is not in good health. How that will lead further. Now, secondly, why this? What was the objective of this code? I'll tell you. So there is a question which will arose in everyone's mind. There was many laws before that which were dealing with respect to the insolvency, such as SICA. Now, what happened in SICA? It's called Sikh Industry Companies Act, wherein when a company is unable to clear its debts, unable to pay to his workmen, then the promoters can go to an authority called BIFR, Board of Industrial and Financial Reconstruction. They will say, sir, my condition is not good. Please wind up my company and you take all my assets and distribute it to my creditors. So there, it can only happen when the promoter, when the company wants. But that measure was not so effective because there the company owners were playing fraud with the law. Similarly, there is an act for the banks, which is called Recovery of Debt and Financial Institution, where if someone fails to pay the amount due to the bank, you can approach to a DRT. But in DRT, there is so much pending disputes that it takes a lot of time to get your money back. So that was also not successful. Then there's an act called SARFAESI, wherein if I have taken a loan and I have given as security my land, my building, my properties. So if I'm unable to pay that debt, what bank can do? Bank can attach that property and sell it to a third party and get the money back. That is called a SARFAESI Act. But that was also not that successful that was expected. So to address, to curb all this problem, this new insolvency and bankruptcy, the third thing why this came up is, if you will see, there are a lot of scams, like a Niro Modi scam or a Vijay Mallya scam. So what was happening was bank was playing fraud with the government. Suppose there's a loan and you have to pay in specific point of time. So bank used to give that money. So when there's a time to repay that loan, this bank used to give those people a new loan. So the money that they used to get, they used to pay that loan, and there's a new loan which is there in their bank balance sheet. That is called window dressing in a commercial term, or it's called evergreening of a loan account. So to address this problem also, this insolvency resolution process was brought into force so that in a limited time, a person can recover its debts, and a company can be, an oxygen can be supplied to a company so that it can revive. Because a company, otherwise, if a company is shut down, it will affect the economy, it will affect the GDP, it will affect the workmen, and it will affect the labor because there's no money to pay to those laborers. So unemployment will rise, GDP will go down, and there will be a trade deficit in the future. So these are the three things. And there's an objective which will also you can find at the first paragraph of the code, which says that an act to consolidate and amend the laws relating to reorganization and insolvency, so and so, in a time-bound manner for maximization of the values of assets of such person, to promote entrepreneurship, availability of credit, and balance the interest of all stakeholders. So herein, a company is also reviving, a creditor is also getting its money back, and everyone is in a happy, jolly mood. Now I request Ayushi to add further to my point.
Yeah, so thanks Devashish, and thank you Bidya for having me here today. It's a great opportunity to be a part of Juris Jura and be present for this webinar. I'll just throw a little light and also, just give a little summary of what Devashish just explained about the entire code. So just to put it in simple words, what issues we can highlight, a few of the issues which were there before the IBC came into picture was, as Devashish mentioned, there were multiple laws like SICA, the Companies Act, the SAFESI Act, which dealt with the issue of insolvency and bankruptcy. Now, since there were multiple legislations, there were multiple forums also to deal with such cases, which again led to a lot of confusion. So because, for example, like there was the DRT, there is the company law board, there are high courts, there are district courts. So basically, a creditor who's lent out the money to the corporate debtor is in a state of great confusion as to which forum and which law he should approach to get the maximum value out of his debt. Now, to address all of the situations, this further led to a lot of pendency of cases with the courts. Now, what happened was, as a result of this huge gamut of laws, there was a lot of confusion between the creditors. Now, every time a creditor was to recover the debts from the debtor, he has to actually analyze each and every legislation as to see what best possible value he can get for his loan. Now, this also led us to, as Devashish mentioned, it also led to a lot of scams and fraud, which again led to a lot of, problem in respect of huge NPAs. So basically an NPA is whenever there's a loan, in simple terms, whenever there's a loan, there's a security attached to it, right? Now, when the defaulter defaults on the loan, the entire asset is also termed as the NPA. Now, whenever there is an NPA, due to huge accumulation of NPAs, the entire credit system in India was, affected. To address all of this situation, the government thought that, they should come up with one single forum to deal with all insolvency and bankruptcy cases. So they formed a committee called BLRC Committee, the Banking Law Reforms Committee, which gave, which studied the entire legislation in respect of insolvency and bankruptcy, which reviewed all the legislation, and it also gave regard to the principle of unicitral model. So, as we all know, India is also a part of the unicitral model. Hence, it was important for us to, consolidate the entire gamut of insolvency and bankruptcy and bring it under one code. This gave rise to the birth of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code in December 2016. Now, just to like simply put it in a few lines, the basic objectives of the code is first to, consolidate the entire legislation and the adjudicating authority, which will be the NCLT and the DRT, depending upon whether the debtor is an individual or a corporate entity. Second of all, as Devashish clearly mentioned that it is not a recovery mechanism under the IBC. Hence, the entire focus of IBC is to revive the company, is to plug in money so that the company can either go back to, if not the position that it was before, at least to a better position, so that the company is not completely dissolved. It should be given a chance to perform better, to have another birth, to again come into the functioning, which also means giving maximum values to the assets of the company. If we talk about IBC, it's a wonderful law, it's a wonderful code, which also gives you, a proper time-bound a time-bound system for the insolvency and bankruptcy of a corporate person. Now, there are strict, as we all know, there are strict timelines under the insolvency code, and this further leads to an effective remedy as compared to any of the remedies that existed in the law before. Now, so to speak of the entire intention, this in return also gave a lot of, way ahead to the ease of doing business in India. So, if we come down to IBC specifically, I believe there are four major pillars of the insolvency and the bankruptcy, which is first the board, which is the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, who's given the duty of managing the entire code. Even when they have to come up with any laws or regulation, it is upon the board to manage the entire code. And also, just to mention, IBB has been a very active organization when it comes to the code, because if you go through just the website of the IBBI, they keep coming up with a lot of changes, and they keep coming up with a lot of initiatives which are there for the betterment of the code and the entire system under this law. The second pillar would be the adjudicating authorities, which is the NCLT. Now, it's one single forum if you have to approach, if you have to take the corporate debtor into an insolvency proceeding, you don't have to be confused about going to the High Court or the District Court or the Company Law Board or the BLRC or to any other committee. You just have to go to one forum, which is NCLT, in case of companies, while if it is in case of individuals, it's the Debt Recovery Tribunal, which is the DRT. The third wing of the entire code, or the third pillar, if you want to say, is the insolvency professionals. Now, insolvency professionals are the entire, group of people who are the force behind this whole code. These people are given up with the maximum responsibility to carry out the entire process of insolvency whenever there's an application that is filed before the NCLT. They also hold a lot of responsibility on their shoulders to, run a company, to manage a company, to take it through the entire insolvency process whenever there's a claim filed against the company. The fourth thing I would say will be the information utilities. So these information utilities, the first one which got registered in India was the NEGSL, which is the National E-Governance Services Limited company. Now they maintain the entire database about the company. So this is again one particular forum, one single forum which has all the data and all the records of the company if you want to seek for any information. Now together, all of these four pillars are the entire driving force behind this whole code. So I think we will be dealing with each one of them as in when we proceed with the entire discussion. And as in when we take you through the entire process. So Devashish, would you now like to discuss about how we can, start with the insolvency process?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much, sir and ma'am, for this. Sir, so can you please give us a bird eye view on process of the corporate insolvency from the litigation perspective?
Yeah. So basically, now I wanted to, suppose you're a lawyer and a State Bank of India or a Union Bank of India or any bank or any NBFC, that is non-banking financial company, approach you saying that we have given a loan amounting to 1.5 crore to a company there are a lot of cement companies in Chhattisgarh. So let's take an example of Ambuja Cement. No offense, there's no defamation. I'm just giving a hypothetical example. Saying an Ambuja Cement is not able to repay their debt in time. So now State Bank wanted an advice from me. What shall we do so that we can recover the money? Now, there will be two ways to do that. Either you can file, since State Bank is a bank, so there's a special court called Debt Recovery Tribunal. You can tell them either you file an application before DRT and try to get your money back from them, or since you can find out, you can smell from their balance sheet that they are not performing well and very soon they are going to wind up. So what you will do is you will advise them to go to again a special court which is there under this code. As Ayushi pointed out, it's National Company Law Tribunal. Now for Chhattisgarh, the jurisdiction is in NCLT Cuttack. Before that we have in Ahmedabad. So we have to go to Ahmedabad to file an application. Now it's in Orissa Cuttack, the jurisdiction is there. So you will file an application. So what you have to see to file an application before an NCLT. So you have the debt, that the amount of money that State Bank has, it's below 1 crore, you cannot file an application under IBC. Before that, the limit was 1 lakh, but because of COVID, they have raised the jurisdiction and put it to 1 crore. So the debt should be more than 1 crore. Now, who can file this application? There are 3 categories of people who can file an application under this code. Under the corporate insolvency, there's a different personal insolvency is also there. But about corporate insolvency, I'll say it's a company, when you're filing an application against a company, a giant, then this process is follows. So 3 types of people who can file. One is financial creditor, second, operational creditor, and third, the corporate debtor himself, which is an Ambuja Cement himself can file an application saying that, sorry boss, I don't have money. You please initiate an insolvency process and you distribute those assets. And you bring some third party to own my assets. Now, so I told him, so there should be a default. Like you have to pay a loan at some particular time and that company failed to pay that loan. Then you made an application to an NCLT. Now let's understand the difference between who is financial creditor, who is operational creditor, and what are the criteria and how the application has to be initiated. Just give me a second, I'll share a short definitions.
Yes. That's sure.
So the definition that I was talking about, which says a person who may initiate a corporate insolvency resolution process. So this process is only against a company. There's also about an individual, which later Ayushi will deal with. So this is a corporate debtor commits a default, a financial creditor or operational creditor or a corporate debtor. So let's first deal with who is a financial creditor. A financial creditor is a person to whom a financial debt is owed and includes a person to whom such debt has been assigned or transferred to. And so what's the meaning of that financial debt? Financial debt is where you have given money as a loan and they have to repay in a specific period of time. So like a gift is not a financial debt, but a financial debt will only be a money where you have given them and they have to repay it in a specific period of time. That's why I have highlighted the word time value of money, and which all debt classified as financial debt has been categorically provided under section 3, section 5, subsection 8. So money borrowed against the payment of interest, any money raised by acceptance under any acceptance credit facility, any amount that is raised pursuant to any note purchase facility, bond, debentures, loans. If you have any difficulty, you can ask any question respect to that. What is this and what is that? Then the amount of any liability in respect of any lease or a hire. Then the amount of any liability, amount raised under any other transaction, including forward sale or purchase agreement. So suppose if you wanted to purchase something and they have given you by way of loan to purchase that and you can repay them later, that will also be a financial debt. Sorry. And then any counter indemnity obligation in respect of guarantee indemnity bond. So indemnity is where you promise to perform a part of a third person. If that third person fails to perform at his obligation, then you have to perform it. So fail to perform obligation will turn financial creditor. And any of any or indemnity classified as a financial creditor. And in most of the litigation, you will see the banks and the NBFC are the financial creditor in general. So if you will see the litigation in the past, like recently in Anil Ambani's Reliance case, you'll find State Bank of India as a financial creditor. So generally, financial creditors are banks and NBFC because of the nature of the debt that they provide. So there's a different mechanism which is provided. So how, if suppose if State Bank of India wanted to initiate a corporate insolvency resolution process, how it should initiate? That is given under section 7. So they have to submit an application there's a specific format which I will take you through later, under which they have to file. So along with that application, they have to give a detail of a transaction, that at what point of time the debtor has paid, what amount of money he has not paid. He has to provide a certificate from his bank to show that, look, he has not given me this part of money, to show that there is a default existing. To satisfy NCLT, yes, there is a default, and they also have to show and there is a separate repository company which is there. It's called information utility. So it's a department where you file all the details with respect to the loan that you have provided. It's a new body which has been formed, so that it has all the details, to whom we have provided our money, from whom we have taken money, everything, the detail is there. So you have to provide a record of default from there. Now, what is the format of application? I'll show you. Are you able to see this? Hello? Yeah, is it visible?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
It's a very simple and easy format. This is a format by which you have to file an application before NCLT for initiating a process. So here a name of financial creditor will come. Here the address and all those things. So this is the column where you have to fill the detail of a financial creditor. Here you have to fill a detail of a corporate debtor. Here now, insolvent interim resolution professional. So who is an interim resolution professional? So suppose if this application is accepted by a NCLT, then a process will start. That process is called a moratorium. Now, what is moratorium? moratorium is like a lockdown which has been imposed by Corona. It's very similar to that, because when moratorium kicks in, what happens? You cannot do anything in respect of a company. The promoter or directors who are running that company will be thrown out, and a new person will be appointed to look after the management and affairs of the company, to take control of the assets and liabilities of a company. And that person is called an interim resolution professional. Interim resolution professional is a qualified person. His qualification, he has to qualify an exam, then he becomes an interim resolution professional. So you have to appoint any one qualified IRP to who can look after the management and affairs once this application is effective. Now, during that period of moratorium, no proceeding can be initiated against that corporate debtor. Like in our hypothetical case in Ambuja, nobody can initiate any proceeding against Ambuja. Nobody can sell any assets. Nobody can purchase any assets. Everything will be stopped completely when a moratorium period is there. And this is the section where a financial debt, you have to put all the details with respect to how much money you owe, how much money you owed from them, how much money has been paid, and how much money is remaining. These are the documents that you have to submit. Record of default, then a record of default with any creditor information companies, then a certificate from a bank, and so on and so on. So if now, if the NCLT found that its application is complete and there is an existence of default, then a corporate insolvency resolution process will commence. And I request all to read one of the landmark judgment where Justice Nariman has very precisely and eruditely has laid down the process. That judgment is of Innoventus Industries versus ICICI Bank. You will find the whole detail and whole issue with respect to Section 7. So this is with respect to a financial creditor. Now let's come to an operational creditor. Now, who is an operational creditor? And this you can see a lot of period of time. Now, suppose a Big Bazaar is there. A Big Bazaar, suppose a Big Bazaar has taken a loan, or they have given a product. They have supplied a product, suppose a lot of around to company sector. This product has been taken credit. That company or a wash company not paid money to a Big Bazaar. This will pay you at a later point of time, at a specific period of time. Now they fail to give money to a Big Bazaar. Or suppose a service has been provided with one of the service providers like Tata Sky to a company, and that company has taken that service with a promise to pay them later their service fee, and then they fail to pay their service fee. So that category or that whole arrangement will be called an operational debt. So if you'll see a definition, it says a person to whom an operational debt is owed. Now, what is operational debt? Operational debt is a claim in respect of provision in goods or services. So a definition of Big Bazaar, in the example of Big Bazaar, it's a goods, that a detergent which was provided. In an example of Tata Sky, a service which was provided, including employment or a debt in respect of payment and dues for a law for time. So in financial creditor, we saw there was a loan. Here, there is a goods and services in which the amount is due. So if there is service provider, suppose if there is a vendor who has provided a good and he has not get his money back from a company, then this operational creditor is operational creditor can initiate a CIRP proceeding. Now, what's the difference between financial the proceeding in relation to a financial creditor and operational creditor. Here, you have to give a mandatory demand notice to a company before initiating a CIRP. In financial creditor, you don't have to give any notice. Now you have to give a demand notice saying that, boss, this much money you owe to me, you pay me, otherwise I will initiate an insolvency proceeding. Now, if that company fails to respond to that notice within 10 days, then you can go to a NCLT and initiate a process. Otherwise, if that company within 10 days and says that I didn't pay your money because there is a default in your goods, or there was a default in your services, and you have cheated me, or you have given me less quantity of goods. So if he says there's a dispute which is there, then if there is a dispute and that's why I am not paying, that's why I'm not paying your money, that point of time he can try to avoid getting CIRP process initiated. But that dispute which is there, that should exist before the issuance of demand notice. So suppose the demand notice I issued today, but that dispute the company has to raise before today. They have to show that list of correspondence that has been exchanged between Big Bazaar and that particular company in relation to a defect of goods, or there is some court proceeding going on, or there is some arbitration proceeding going on. If he able to show that there is a dispute which is existing and you cannot initiate a CIRP process against me, then his application will be rejected by an NCLT. Again, the form that I show, similar form has been given. Due to a time constraint, I don't want to show you that form and again, but you can check in that below that form which I showed to you previously. There's a format of demand notice. You don't have to put an extra effort to draft a demand notice. There's a format is there. You just fill the blanks, show that demand notice. Again, you fill that blank in the form. You file an application as an operational creditor. Now the last one is a corporate debtor. Now suppose I give an example of Ambuja Cement. Now suppose Ambuja Cement itself feels that he is not able to pay the money of 5 to like n number of people. So they themselves will go to NCLT and file an application under section 10 of IBC. Which says the initiation of corporate insolvency process, resolution process by a corporate applicant. So where a corporate debtor has committed a default, a corporate applicant therefore may file an application for initiating a corporate resolution process with an adjudicating authority. So these are the three sets of people who can file application for initiation of corporate insolvency resolution process. Now what happens once that application is accepted? So there's a default of 1 crore. Now, in case of financial creditor, there is an existence of default. In case of operational creditor, there is no dispute which is pending, and he hasn't received a response to a demand notice. Operational creditor application is accepted, or section 10 application is accepted. Then a court will accept the application and they will order a moratorium. Now, this whole process of insolvency has to be completed within 180 days. It's a very time-bound mechanism. The moment the order is passed, you have to complete the whole process within 180 days. If for some reason you're unable to complete that process within 180 days, then the more extension will be given of 90 days. So 180 plus 90, 270 days. Within 270 days, you have to complete the whole process. Unlike in civil court, where the matter is pending for n number of years. So during the time of moratorium, and along with that moratorium, so once an application is accepted, three things will happen. First, a moratorium will be there. Second, an interim resolution professional will be appointed. As I told you before, that IRP will be appointed who will take over the control of a company. Now, what he will do is, he will see what all assets are there, what all liabilities are there. He will make a list. Who all are the creditors of the company? So there will be some third party from which Ambuja Cement owes the money. So he will make a list of all those creditors to whom Ambuja has to pay a money, and then he will publish a public announcement in a newspaper like Times, publish a saying he has been and wants this in uh, time he will say that who all has a claim, all the people who owes a loans or who have to take money back from Ambuja, they can send their proposal, they can send their nomination to me within a specific period of time. So all those creditors will send the details of their loans to that IRP. He'll prepare that list of creditors. So moratorium will be there. Insolvency professional is appointed. He will make a public announcement. Then all those creditors will give the details of their loans. He will make a list of creditors, and then he will form an association of creditors, which is called a committee of creditors. Now, in that committee of creditors, one of the most the point that really pricks me is those committee of creditors will only be there of a financial creditors and not operational creditors. So I think so there's a discrimination between financial and operational, but it's a law. We cannot do anything. So a financial creditor, those financial creditor will only forms part of that committee of creditors. So those all creditors will have one committee. Now, as a word is interim resolution professional. So the word interim is his role was only till the time of moratorium, till the time of passing of an order from NCLT to a formation of a committee of creditors. Now, once a committee is formed, then you have to appoint a permanent resolution professional. So how to appoint that permanent resolution professional? A permanent resolution professional has to be appointed in a meeting when more than 66%, let me check if I'm correct, there has to be, so there has to be more than 66% voting share of a creditor. So suppose there are 5 people who are willing to be an RP, resolution professional. So in whose favor there is more than 60% have agreed, that person will be appointed a resolution professional, and then he will take over all the further proceedings for going forward. He will take over the control of an assets. He will run the company as a going concern company. The company, the working of the company should not be affected. Like in case of Ambuja, his cement manufacturing should go on. The purchase, the sale, everything must go on in a very normal way. But instead of owners of that cement company, now the resolution professional will run the company till the time a new company comes up and take over this ill-helped company from out of the resolution process. Now from here, I'll request Ayushi to take on, and she'll explain you how a resolution plan is formed and how the structure is given to you.
Yeah. So thanks, Devashish. Thank you
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, so Devashish, thank you for taking us through the inception of the entire insolvency plan, and how can you actually initiate an application for the insolvency. Now, I would just like to also briefly touch upon a few questions or say a few thoughts that Devashish raised during his presentation, and while also taking you forward in the entire mechanism and the process of the resolution plan and etc. To simplify, we understood that the application could be filed by 3 people. First is the financial creditors, the operational creditors, or the company itself who's defaulted in the payments. Now, to bring you to the question of the committee of creditors, so I think Devashish did throw some light on the committee of creditor. I would just like to give you some more points about that committee of creditors. Now, the entire idea of insolvency and bankruptcy code is that the whole mechanism and process of insolvency is run by the creditors themselves. They have been given a larger representation in this entire process, And hence whatever happens in the entire in relation to the corporate debtor, who's the company who owes the money to these creditors, the entire decision is basically taken up by these committee of creditors. Devashish, I think you also pointed out on the fact that, why is it the case that only the financial creditors are given a representation in the committee of creditors, whereas there's a discrimination towards the operational creditors to get a representation in the committee of creditors. Although there are cases where, even when operational creditor is the one who's initiating the entire CIRP process, they are basically not given any representation only in the committee of creditors. So how can they be in a position to decide the fate of the company? So it might seem to be discriminatory, but I would just like to throw one point in this regard that, the operational creditors who, if you simplify it and see it as suppliers or the persons who are supplying goods or services to a company are only concerned about getting their money back for what they've supplied to the company. Like they don't care about the entire health or the entire resolution of a company, so to say. Financial creditors are the one who put in a lot of money in the company and who are actually concerned about the revival of the company. It's not only about recovery for them, because it's beyond recovery. They're also interested in the performance and growth of the company. This could be one argument to justify why the financial creditors are given more representation, or say the entire representation, even to vote on behalf of the committee of creditor. But I would not miss to say one point that if a operational creditor owes more than 10% of the entire debt of the company, then he can be a part of the committee of creditor. However, he cannot vote on any matters. So technically, it's only the financial creditors who are voting. Now, this might also bring you to another question, that what if there's no there's no financial creditor in the company? Then who's going to form the committee of creditor, which is also commonly known as the COC, and who's going to run the entire resolution process? Now, to give you a safety in this regard, what the regulation, the IBBI CIRP regulation 2016 provides that if there are no financial creditors in a company, then the 18 largest creditors, the 18 largest operational creditors can form a committee of creditors. Now, this will also include one person from the who's representing the workmen and one person who's representing the employees who's not in the list of those 18 people that I mentioned earlier. So, so to say, the entire IBC process is a creditor-driven process. Now, this brings me also to I would just like to also mention briefly about how they function and meet. So every time there's a decision that has to be taken in respect of the entire, the company who's defaulted, either the company who's defaulted or about the entire process of CIRP, the resolution professional is the one who gives a notice to the committee of creditors. Now, there's a meeting of committee of creditors. For example, you all might be aware about how a company runs, how the board of directors are the ones who are running the company, how they meet at specific intervals and take decisions about the company. Similarly, in case a company goes for insolvency, the committee of creditors are the one who take the position of the management. Now, they come up, they meet at irregular times. They are given a certain notice by the resolution professional. They take the major decisions in respect of a company who's gone into insolvency. Now, generally, for example, just to point out a few small, procedural points, the quorum is defined by at least 33% of the person who will hold the voting rights. Generally, any decision in respect of the entire process is taken by a vote of 51%, which is the majority vote, unless it's otherwise provided under the Act, which is, say, certain special circumstances, it also ranges from 66% to 90%. You all might be thinking about how we did talk about how you can file for an application. What happens if the application to take a company to the corporate insolvency resolution process is admitted? But what if at any time the creditor, for example, in case of, the example that Devashish gave, in that example, suppose Ambuja Cement and one of the suppliers or one of the banks who has lent money to Ambuja Cement thinks about a settlement, or to walk off from the entire process and think that, Ambuja Cement is now in a position to pay out the debts and wants to withdraw from the entire process. In that case, what could happen is, first of all, it's only upon the committee of creditors to take this decision. Now, if the committee of creditors wish that they want to withdraw an application, they don't want to drag the company through the entire insolvency proceeding, then what they can do is they can, by a vote of 90%, they can file an application before the adjudicating authority through the resolution professional, saying that we don't want to further take the company and we would like to withdraw our application. These are very, very special and very rare circumstances. Hence, this new section 12A was introduced, where it gave the power to the committee of creditor. But this should happen before a resolution plan is submitted. Okay. Now, let's talk about how this entire process is run and how the resolution professional takes the charge of running the whole process. Now, I think Devashish also mentioned this fact that it is upon the resolution professional who take the entire custody of the entire assets and management of the company. In this regard, every person who's involved with the company will report to the resolution professional in case if he has any matter that needs his concern. Now, what a resolution professional does is he has to prepare an information memorandum. Now, what this information memorandum contains is, it contains the entire details about the company who's gone into the CIRP process. It includes all the assets of the company, what is the financial position, what is the financial strength of the company, what are the creditors who are the creditors of the company, and what is the default or what is the amount that the company owes to them. Or it could also include certain other topics like the material litigation, if there's any pending litigation or any dispute against the company, or it could also include the list of employees and workmen in the company, and as to if there's any amount that is due to these people that has to be addressed. Now, what this information memorandum acts, this information memorandum acts as a document, or you can say a guideline for the person, for a third party who wish to acquire the company or who wish to take over the company who's gone into the CIRP process. Now, what happens is this information memorandum contains the entire detail about the company. Now, this is filed with, firstly, this is submitted with the committee of creditors, which is the COC. It goes to the adjudicating authority, which is the NCLT. Now this information memorandum is basically published for the other people, the third parties who are external to this entire process, to get a knowledge and information about the company who's gone into the liquidation, who's gone into the insolvency process. Now, post the resolution professional prepares this information memorandum, what he does is he goes and publishes an advertisement which also invites for expression of interest. Now, what is an expression of interest? An expression of interest will be filed by third parties who are willing to come and jump into the entire process and who are willing to give, say, a bid to, to restructure or to acquire a company who's gone into the entire insolvency process. Now, once there's an invitation in this regard, this invitation, or you could say an advertisement, this advertisement is hosted on all the newspapers. Generally, locally, the newspapers where the registered office of the company is situated. What we generally do in cases of a company, you can just apply the same logic or the similar logic here. And it is also published on the website of the company, or it could also be published in the website of the board, which is the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, the IBBI. Now, what happens is, as soon as the public is aware that, this company is going into the insolvency, now what happens is there are certain potential, or you can say prospective corporate applicants who see that, say for example, in case of Ambuja Cement, there could be some other cement company which would feel that, Now that I'm in the same line of business, why not? Why don't I go there and just see what is the business of Ambuja and see if I can meet up those defaults that is done by Ambuja and acquire the company. That will benefit me as well, right? So now these prospective applicants, which are called as resolution applicants, go and submit an expression of interest. They say that, boss, I am interested in, taking this company that has gone into insolvency and I want to restructure this company. I want to pay for the defaults. So please accept my expression of interest. So this is till now it's well and good. The prospective resolution applicants who are the third parties could be any other company, like say for example the Ultratech company or any other cement company or any other company who can show that I have the potential to revive the company who's going into insolvency, can come and submit an expression of interest. However, now there are still certain conditions or there are certain restrictions to this. So first of all, you have to meet all the, any resolution applicant who's going to submit a expression of interest will have to meet all the criteria that a resolution professional has laid down in respect of a company which is gone into the insolvency. If you meet those criteria, then you go and submit an expression of interest. However, there is a new change in the law where there was a new section which was brought. So what used to happen was a lot of other, what used to happen was the promoters of the company, the existing promoter. So say a person A in Ambuja Cement, what he does is they've defaulted. Ambuja Cement has, defaulted a lot of, they're defaulted in a lot of loans and they have a lot huge debt pending with them. Now, what they used to do is, suppose the same Mr. X comes in and once the company goes into insolvency, comes and says that I want to acquire this company through another entity, say an ABC entity. Now, what this used to create was that it's basically like a backdoor entry that the same promoter is making, right? He was already there in Ambuja Cement. He made huge defaults. Now he wants to take over Ambuja Cements again through another route, through a backdoor entry. This created, which is very much prejudicial to the creditors, right? Because their interest is affected. Now they don't want the same person or the same promoter to run Ambuja Cement because they've already defaulted once. Now to tackle this whole situation, a new section was brought, which is section 29A in the IBC code, which also prescribed for certain people who will be ineligible to be resolution applicants. Now, to say ineligible to be resolution applicants, which means that you cannot participate in the entire insolvency process. You have to stay out of the whole proceeding. These people, for example, included certain people who were, say, for example, who have committed any default, who are undischarged insolvents, or who have, who have been restricted by SEBI, for example, to trade in the securities market, or who have been committed of any offense where they have been, sentenced with imprisonment for over 2 years in respect of the acts which is mentioned in the Schedule 12th of the code itself. So you can draw a reference to that. Now, so this section 29A provided a list of people who cannot basically be a part of the entire process. They cannot come and give a proposal, or they cannot be a prospective bidder in case of a company. This entire section 29A in itself is, it imposes a lot of restrictions. So it is not only the ineligible person itself. If suppose I am an ineligible person, if I am related to the company somewhere, it's not only me who will be barred, but it will be my connected persons, the entire related party to those connected persons, and any person who's acting in concert with me. So this applies to a huge lot of people who can be barred by, the court to be a part of the entire process. Now, if there's no ineligibility in this respect, then your expression of interest, as we were talking about earlier, will be submitted, will be admitted by the resolution professional. Now, after the expression of interest is accepted, the resolution professional will prepare a list of prospective bidders, right? So there will be 3-4 participants, or say 5-10 participants, who will be given an opportunity to submit the resolution plan. Now, when we talk about a resolution plan, what resolution plan provides for is the entire process in which the company will be revived. So basically, it's an invitation where you say how you're going to take up the company, how are you going to revive the whole company. Now the resolution applicants, the prospective resolution applicants, what they do is that they are allowed to submit a resolution plan. Now, this resolution plan has to be very strictly, drafted and formulated. The resolution plan, so I think Devashish is just trying to share the screen where he's going to take us through the entire contents of the resolution plan. But I'll just briefly tell you as to what the resolution plan contains, okay? So, also first coming to the entire process of the resolution plan, what I'll try to point out is that how the resolution applicant will go over this entire process. So the resolution applicant, who is a prospective resolution applicant, right, who wants to take the company, will check the entire information memorandum. He will see, he'll study the whole company. What we generally call it in terms of the corporate law, say the professional law, is that they will conduct a due diligence in respect of that company. They will see as to what all matters are there in the company, as to what is the position of the employees of the company, what is the position of the intellectual property rights, what are the defaults that the company has committed, is there any pending litigation that is there against the company, and they'll do the entire study, and they will then see if they can actually, if they are willing to take up the company who's going through the entire insolvency process. So I'll just give you a brief idea about what a resolution plan contains, okay? So a resolution plan has to be very properly drafted. It takes a lot of angles into picture when it comes to a resolution plan, because this is your entire, you can say this is the entire basis on which your application will be considered, or you can have a potential to take the company that you're willing to take. There are obviously the act, the code, and the regulation prescribe you a detail of what could be the mandatory contents of a resolution plan. It definitely has to provide for payment of the default. Now, if there's a default, how are you going to pay that default? Are you going to raise more capital? Are you going to flush in cash into the company? Or how are you going to take that whole, default and recover, give back the money that the creditors owe, is contained in the resolution plan. Just to take you, if you all can see in your screen, I'll just briefly take you through the document. That this particular document has been actually prepared by the ICSI. So although this is not a statutory document, you cannot completely place reliance upon this, because it's just for a reference purpose as to what basically is a part of the model resolution plan. If we go through the entire table of contents, it says definition and interpretation. The second point says overview of the corporate debtor and the corporate insolvency process. So see, it's like, if I don't know if any of you are aware, but whenever, as and when you start working, or if you've worked already with the corporate teams, then what we generally do is, you must have heard about duties, right? The due diligence that we conduct. So this could be seen as similar to a due diligence report, where you give a executive summary of the company that you're willing to take. You give a brief background about their company as to what was the reason of the company going into the insolvency process, or the reason behind the company defaulting at the first place. This is just to give a summary about the company that is going to be a part of the insolvency that you're willing to take up. Now, if you see, I think the second and the third point covers for both of these reasons only, as to the reason of insolvency and the background of the company. The fourth point contains about the overview of the resolution applicant. Now, it's also very important for you to highlight as to why are you a potential bidder? Why can you be a potential resolution applicant? What qualities or what strengths do you have in order to take the company? Why should the creditors place reliance upon you to give their company to you. Now, these are the contents of the resolution applicant, where you have to give your details about the entire company and about your intention of being a part of this whole process. If you come down to point of fifth, it says details of the resolution plan. Now, these are very minute details. It covers the entire gambit of how the company will be run, what are the tax implications, what is the financial position, what will be the capital structure, how are you going to, infuse money in the company, what will be the entire, say for example, what will happen to all the claims that are there of the creditors, if you're going to pay them in full or are you giving them some haircut, which means that are you going to pay, say, the entire 100% of their debt, or they're going to get some cut from those debts, and what could be other potential matters in this thing. So it requires a lot of, expertise to prepare this entire resolution plan. So I think a lot of, teams, which includes the tax teams, the teams dealing with employment laws, all of them have to give their special advisory in these cases to deal with each of these points as to how you're proposing to take a company who's gone into the liquidity, who's gone into insolvency. Now, you also have to not just make up facts and just say that, I'm going to do this and that. You also have to prove as to how are you going to implement the whole plan. You have to show as to how can the plan be, if you have that much potential to deal with the plan at all or not, if you basically have the intention of taking this whole process sincerely and complying with the whole process while being in the framework of law. These are just the basic contents of the resolution plan. I would just like to mention that, because now while you're submitting this entire resolution plan, there are a lot of declarations and undertakings that you have to take. So first of all, as we saw that in the information memorandum, you get a lot of detail about the company, right? Now you cannot just, these are matters which are very critical and confidential to a company. So you can't simply just know all of these facts and take an undue advantage of it and then just try to make a backdoor entry or do something to harm the company. So you have to be strictly within the spheres of law. You have to abide by a lot of confidentiality obligation. You have to show that you're not ineligible under section 29A. For example, in case of Ruchi Soya, I remember there were two potential resolution applicants, which was Adani Wilmar and Patanjali. So although Ruchi Soya wanted to give the bid to Adani Wilmar, but they found out that, they were barred under section 29A and they were ineligible to actually submit a bid. So it eventually went to Patanjali in that case, in case of Ruchi Soya. So you have to see an entire checklist of all of those points as to whether you're eligible, whether you're ready to comply with all of those policies, whether you're there to meet all the conditions that the creditors have imposed or not, and then finally submit a resolution plan. Now, this is all about submitting the plan, okay? Once the plan has been, has been received by the resolution professional, the resolution professional presents those plans in front of the committee of creditors. Now, what the committee of creditor does is, because this is going to be the resolution plan is the entire Bible which is going to revive the company, they have to carefully, evaluate each resolution plan and vote on it. Now, earlier I would just to give you a brief view about what happened before. What used to happen was that the committee of creditors will evaluate each of the resolution plan, see if it is meeting their criteria or not, and then vote on it. So it was not necessary that they will vote on all the plans. What they will see was if, say, an X plan is meeting the criteria, let's only vote upon X plan. But there was a recent amendment in which there was a recent notification which just came in August 7, which came in on August 7, 2020, which provided that, the committee will have to vote on all the resolution plans that are being presented in front of them, which means that together you will vote each and every plan. So if there are, say, 5 plans, then you vote on those 5 plans. Now, whichever plan receives the highest vote will be, will further go for approval. Now, when I say highest vote, the minimum voting percentage for an approval of a plan is 66%. So you will still have to maintain that 66%. there could be plans which will not meet only, which will fail to meet even 66% criteria. That will definitely go as a rejected slot. Whatever plans meet the 66% wala criteria will only go forward. And if there's a, say if there's a equal vote that two of the plans have received, then there's a tiebreaker formula that the professional will provide at the very inception for a tiebreaker between two similar plans which have gotten equal votes. Now once a resolution plan has been approved, first of all, the resolution professional will go and take this resolution plan to the adjudicating authority, which is the NCLT. Once they have got the approval from the committee of creditor, it is upon the NCLT to decide whether this is the plan that they want to approve or not approve, right? And once this entire process fails, if suppose this entire process fails, they will again call for fresh resolution plan. However, it's very important for all of us to keep in mind that this entire process is going to be conducted within that timeline of that 180 days plus 90 days, as if you all remember, Devashish mentioned earlier when we explained you about how this entire process is a time-bound process. So this whole thing is conducted within 180 days only. Now, I think this is all about how a resolution plan basically functions. Now, I think I'll request Devashish to carry on further after what happens if a resolution plan is suppose not accepted, or if there's an appeal that a resolution applicant wants to file against the decision of the committee of creditors.
Yeah, so just I'll summarize what we both spoke about. So we started the default, then application, and to NCL. If NCL approves that plan, then successfully that company which has bidded will get the whole assets and the liabilities of the company. Now, if that resolution plan fails, then a proceeding will start, which is called a winding up proceeding, wherein the whole company will comes to an end, and that those assets will be distributed in this which is now the money which is remaining with that particular company, in our example, Ambuja Cement. So from that money, the first payment in proportional, in pari passu manner, will be given to the IRP and the liquidator. Then it will be given to their employees and secured creditors. Secured creditors are those whose loan is secured by way of mortgage or hypothecation. Then the employees, then the unsecured financial creditors, then the government dues such as taxes, other debts, then preference shareholders and equity shareholders. So this way the assets will be distributed, and then the company will be over. There will be nothing in the records of a MCA. So this is the whole process of CRP. Now, now there are a few things I wanted to, since there's a time constraint and I have some personal commitment, so I'll just touch upon some of the points that I wanted to engage. The first, suppose during the time of CIRP, there is some injustice happening. Now, suppose in case of Ambuja Cement, 5 cement companies have given their bids, like Ultratech, ACC, Lafarge, Grasim, Imami, and Bangar Cement. Now, suppose one resolution plan is accepted, and suppose Ultratech Cement's resolution plan is accepted, the bid, and if the creditors are doing something malified manner, so what's the relief that is available to the Bangar Cement? So the relief that is available is given under section 60 of the insolvency this code. Section 60 is like a door where you just have to ring a bell and NCLT will take you in to provide you a remedy. Section 60 is a very wide, has a very wide amplitude to provide you a relief. Also, during the resolution process, if a resolution found that the promoters have done something offense, or they themselves has brought a company to this stage where the company is not able to pay his debt in way of by way of some offense or by way of money laundering, then he can go to NCLT and inform NCLT that look, these are the promoters who have done a fraud with the company due to which the company is in the bad health. So what NCLT will do? NCLT will tell those promoters to contribute to a company, to the assets of the company from their personal assets. Now, where it's given? It's given under section 66 of an IBC code. Now, I'll tell you two things, which is very important. Due to this this COVID-19 impact, the government, the Ministry of Economic Affairs, has suspended important provisions. That is sections. So suppose if any default has arose after 25th March 2020, then nobody can file an application under section 7, 9 and 10 for those default which arose after 25th March for a period of 1 year. Why? Because of COVID-19 and to improve the economy. And how this has been brought by way of an ordinance on 5th of June 2020. For a default which raised after 25th March. This is one thing. Second thing is a limitation. Now, what is the time within which you have to file an application? So that is given under section 238A, that you have to file within 3 years from the date of default. That any application now to Innovation Private Limited versus Cruiser Software. Therein, you will understand that what is the definition of dispute, how a operational creditors mechanism goes on, and the citation is 2018 1 SCC 353, wherein the court has said that the existence of dispute and for the suit or arbitration must be pre-existing before a receipt of demand notice. So operational creditors has to raise an application. That dispute has to be there before a demand notice is issued in cases of operational creditor. So this is about that. And the last thing, there might be a question which might come into your mind, that suppose a bank has filed an application in DRT. Despite that, still can a financial creditor can initiate this corporate insolvency process? The answer is yes, it can, because the process under DRT is a recovery process. This is not a recovery process, and this is not, which is my personal opinion. This is a judgment which has been laid down in SREI infrastructure. Also, the constitutional validity of this whole code was challenged, saying that this code is constitutionally invalid because it creates a discrimination between a financial creditor and operational creditor. The Supreme Court dismissed that constitutional challenge and uphold the validity of this law, saying that this code is very well valid because there is a logic creating a difference between a financial creditor and operational creditor. And as Ayushi mentioned, that financial creditor infuses more fund, gives more fund to the company. Therefore, there's a difference between a financial creditor and the operational creditor. So this is the basic gist that I wanted to talk about. And unfortunately, I have to leave now. So then you can mail it to me. I'll be happy to address that. Thank you to all the organizers and Ayushi for the efforts that they have put in for this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. So, ma'am, the question to you is, ma'am, what is the role of a corporate lawyer during CIRP?
Yeah, sure, Vidya. So thanks for your question, Vidya. I think we've got a litigation perspective about the entire court. I will just like to throw some light about what a corporate lawyer does in this entire court, and if there's any, if there's any potential for you, for anybody who's willing to practice as a corporate lawyer to learn the IBC. Now, I would like to say that each and every lawyer practicing in any field, be it mergers or acquisition, be it employment laws, or be it a practice in the banking and finance, has a crucial role to play in this entire process of IBC. Because, for example, the entire IBC, the entire code goes hand in hand in respect of any mergers and acquisitions that could be there. Technically what happens is that any party who's willing to take up the company will only go through a mechanism of a merger or acquisition, right? It'll go on to restructuring the entire company, and hence that is the role that a corporate lawyer plays. Now, the entire process, if you break down, then you can see that your role, you would have a role in, conducting due diligence for the companies. You can also be a lawyer to the resolution applicants and help them prepare the resolution plans. You can be a tax lawyer and give advisory in matters relating to the entire restructuring of this entire transaction. Once this whole transaction is actually, once a company's bid is actually accepted, what also happens is that the corporate lawyers, so to say, or the transactional lawyers, have an important role in documenting and drafting all the agreements in relation to the whole transaction. So hence it's not only limited to the litigation lawyers or the lawyers who go to the NCLT to practice. It is also very important for each and every lawyer to learn the IBC and to play a very crucial role. So there are numerous transactions that comes to a corporate lawyer, including all the transactional documentation, conducting the due diligence, or giving advisory in specialized matters relating to their field. It could also be something in relation to say, for example, employment, because even the employees are going to be affected when the company goes into liquidation, goes into insolvency, right? So I think that is the role that a corporate lawyer plays in this whole proceeding. And just to add in this respect, I think since a lot of audience will include a lot of law students, I will also like to point out that there are ample amount of opportunities even for the law students. As I mentioned earlier, the IBBI, which is the board, is a very, is a very active board, and they keep coming up with a lot of opportunities for law students as well. They keep having a lot of programs where you can intern with the IBBI. You can put an application to the IBBI, give your entire documents and records, and you can actually intern with the board if you are actually interested to learn about this entire process, because it's still developing. It's a fresh code. It's just a very new legislation. You can also have an opportunity if you are a person who's interested into researching a lot, or who's good at writing articles, then you can also be a researcher with the IBBI. They also have opportunities for law students to be researchers with the board, and they themselves give a list of some 50-60 odd topics where you can pick up any topic and you can present a paper on that paper goes through an entire evaluation mechanism, and you can actually end up earning say up to 70,000 or something. So there are guidelines in respect of both internships with the board and being a researcher. There are also a lot of essay competitions that the board holds for the students to participate. Now, if there are any lawyers who are already into the practice, and if they want to know as to what potential do they have under the code, what they can do is, so as I mentioned, the entire process is run by the insolvency professional, right? Now, these professionals are people who, for example, are people who are qualified to be, say, lawyers, as chartered accountants, or as company secretaries, or as cost accountants. So in fact, if you would be surprised to know that each and every insolvency professional has to be a part of an insolvency professional agency. Now, till date, there are only 3 insolvency professional agencies who have been given registration by their board, which is the ICAI, which is the Institute for Chartered Accountants, the Institute for Cost Accountants, and the institutes of the company secretary. So, in fact, including all the lawyers and the professionals, if you are into practice already for a period of 10 years, then you can qualify for the limited insolvency examination and be registered with the board as a insolvency professional. And you can actually take the control of the company and be and contribute to as a substantial part of the entire insolvency process. So over to you, Vidya, if you have any more questions for
Thank
me.
you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. So if it pleases you now, can we move towards the question answer session by taking up the questions?
Sure. Yeah, sure, Vidya.
Thank you, ma'am. So Yash, we are starting the question answer session. Kindly unmute one by one those who are raising hands. Yash, are you hearing me?
Yes. Participants,
So one by
please.
one.
Good evening, ma'am.
Participants, those who are yes.
Ma'am,
Continue,
thus explain a process in which about whom the petition is filed argues that he get defected pieces or low quantity or quality.
Right.
The process was not clear. So can you please repeat that?
Yeah, sure. So I think the case that you're mentioning is in respect of an operational creditor. Now, in case if there's an operational creditor, they will say that the goods there is a question about the quality of goods and the services that they have performed. If that is the question, then this will qualify as a dispute. Now, in respect of anything to do with the quality, you have to, as Devashish would have explained you, this entire process is in respect of an operational creditor. So you have to give basically a demand notice to the company where you say that these are the issues or these are the disputes that I have against you. Are you willing to resolve those disputes, or should I take you to the NCLT for the insolvency, for the insolvency process? So basically, this comes under, if you can, this also comes under Section 9 and Section 8, which is in respect of the operational creditors. If they have any disputes regarding the quality of services, they can move an application.
Ma'am, my second question is, can you please repeat the difference between insolvency and bankruptcy?
Sorry?
Difference between insolvency and bankruptcy. Can you please define that again?
Yeah, sure, Ayushi. I think it's a very good question. A lot of us will be confused about what is an insolvency and what is a bankruptcy. So basically, insolvency is an inability of a person to pay. Now, which means that my assets or the money that I have with me is not sufficient to pay my debts or the loans that I've taken from the creditors. This is a state of an insolvency. So an insolvency is a process, whereas bankruptcy is the destination. A person can be insolvent and can further lead to bankruptcy. However, a bankrupt cannot be, just be bankrupt. He has to go through the process of insolvency. Bankruptcy is a condition where the court is, decided upon a person to be as bankrupt. So it's by an order of the court that you're adjourned as a bankrupt. And insolvency is just a condition or a situation, so to say, that you're unable to pay the debts. Whereas in bankruptcy, it's by a formal order of the court that you're declared bankrupt, that you cannot anymore pay your debts to your creditors. And if you talk about liquidation, there's one more concept of liquidation. I'd just like to slightly point out that liquidation is in respect of only companies, which are corporate entities. Now, liquidation is a concept where if the company is bound up, that could lead to a liquidation, because liquidation can happen only in case of corporate entities who have been incorporated under an act, whereas bankruptcy happens in case of individuals. So this is the major difference between insolvency and bankruptcy.
Ma'am, who appoints the person during the process of moratorium?
Okay, so I think by person you would mean that
The officer or the owner of the new?
Okay, so by persons, I think you mean the insolvency professional. So for an appointment of the insolvency professional, it is the board, which is the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, which takes the decision to, appoint a person who's in insolvency profession and who's going to carry out the entire process of CIRP.
And ma'am, what
Yeah.
what is DRT?
Okay, so DRT is a debt recovery tribunal, which was formed under the Act of Recovery of Debts Due to Banks and Financial Institutions. DRT is specific if we talk in context of the IBC, it is the DRT is a adjudicating forum for individuals and partnerships firm. So there are two, if you bifurcate, there are two parts of IBC. One is for the corporate persons and LLPs. The second part is for partnership firms and individuals. While in case of companies and LLPs, the adjudicating authority is NCLT and the appeal goes to NCLAT. In case of individuals and partnership, the adjudicating authority is the Debt Recovery Tribunal and the appeal goes to the Debt Recovery Appellate Tribunal.
Okay, the next one.
Mohua, please ask your question.
Hello, ma'am. My question is, what are the penalty provision provided under Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code?
Yeah, so sure, Moa. I think this is something that you can refer under the code because it's a very straight line procedure. Like it's a very straightforward thing when you have to check any penalties and punishments under the code. So I think for that you can draw a reference to the code itself.
Okay, the next one.
Hello. My question is, what is the role of cash flow forecast in avoiding insolvency? And is there any other method of avoiding insolvency?
Okay, so far as avoiding insolvency is concerned, then I think it depends largely upon the governance of the entire company, right? So I think if you all must be aware of the Companies Act, it imposes a lot of duties upon a company to take care of its affair. It imposes a lot of other machineries in the company, like the auditors, the legal practitioners, who are a part of the company who continuously checks about the governance of the entire company, right? So it's about how well you run your business, how within this sphere of law you're able to perform your activities, and how you're able to take care of all your assets and liabilities. So it also depends a lot upon your business structure, the business idea, and about the finances of your company. But I think a good way of avoiding insolvency, for example, would be to take care of to record for each of your debts and to be prepared and to have plans of paying it out as and when the time comes, right? And I think just to point out one more thing.
Next question.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am, you can continue.
Yeah, Vidya. So I think just to add to that question about how to avoid insolvency, I think Devashish also mentioned when he was speaking about what are the changes that COVID brought into this entire framework. So, there was a latest ordinance that came in June, which said that now if a company after 25th March, if they've defaulted in any of their liabilities, then they cannot be dragged for a CIRP process, which is a huge, move towards this entire process, because this will prevent all of those companies who have actually got a lot of burden due to this entire situation and are unable to pay their debt. So they cannot, for a period of at least 6 months, which can also be further extended to 1 year, they can a claim cannot be brought against such companies if they're defaulting. And I would just like to add one more point, which I think
Thank you so much, ma'am.
which I think I would like to add just one more point. So, Devashish explained you about the entire process of acceptance of an application for insolvency, right? Now, in those cases, the amount of default was earlier for 1 lakh rupees. Now, after this entire situation, it has been turned, and it's been now changed to 1 crore rupees. So the default now has to be 1 crore for a company to go into the insolvency process.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. And sorry, as for the time constraint, we cannot take up more questions. So you can give the question to our mail IDs and we will give your answers to your respective mail IDs. So before wrapping up, ma'am or sir, do you want to mention anything to our participants?
I think
Yeah,
thanks,
sorry,
Vidya.
I'm
Yeah, Devashish, we are here. Come on. Yeah. Please continue.
no. So in order, see, insolvency and bankruptcy is something very blooming or very mushrooming in the future, and very soon we are going to see a cross-border insolvency. Now I'll tell you what cross-border insolvency is. Now our IBC is restricted only to the domestic jurisdiction of India, so it can only take care of the assets which are there within India. Now cross-border insolvency. So suppose if a company has its assets in Brazil or US, now there also by signing our international treaties and all, the IBC will take care of it. So to have a future, and there's a lot of, I think so, Ayushi might have might have enlightened you about the fact that if you see our big law firms, they have a separate department of insolvency and bankruptcy code where they deal with litigation, documents, etc. And there is also a great prospect to be a resolution professional. However, in our Chhattisgarh, in our state, Chhattisgarh, we don't have much exposure to this particular law, rather other commercial laws also, because I haven't seen much arbitration, IBC, or other. Many times, of course, it's not possible. We don't have Cs, but of course, there are other commercial law which we don't have exposure to. So definitely, it's a great attempt by this Iris Jura and the upcoming law colleges in our state, like Amity Law School, Max Law School, or this ITM Law School, of course the HNLU and GGU, that is Guru Nanak, sorry, what is that, which is in Bilaspur at university. So we have to, Guru Ghasidas, yeah, correct. So we have to make an attempt to write how to make an attempt to make people aware of this laws, because I see when a contract is signed here, there is no one of the most great law, which is a less time consuming, less economic friendly. So we have to make people aware about all these new laws. We have to read about new laws. We have to write research paper on that. We have to conduct more and more moot court competitions. We have to attend more seminars so that we can be in touch. Since we both being in Bombay, me and Ayushi, so we always constantly touch with these laws because of the matters that we handle. So we have also you need to interact. You have to expand the horizon of your networking skills. You have to interact with the lawyers who are there in the tier 1 cities, so that you will understand that what is happening there. You can adapt there. So that will be a great attempt, and also it will helpful for your personal career also. And thanks to Juris Jura and all the associate sponsors for this innovative and wonderful approach in utilizing this time. And also thanks to Ayushi and Yash and Abhinav and Vidya for having this session a very comprehensive and structured. Unfortunately, I'm not well. Otherwise, I would have taken more efforts to take you through a judgment which was talking about a constitutional validity, which is very interesting judgment, and I'll request you to read. It's a Swiss Ribbons judgment by Justice Nariman, where you will understand how you have to challenge a law, how a challenge is dismissed, and how a challenge is upheld. And you always remember Keshwanand Bharati, which talks about the basic structure of the constitution. So every law is challenged on a test of Article 14, 19, and 21 of the Constitution. So I request you all to read that particular judgment and the judgment of Innoventus and the Kirusa, which will help you understand more about this process. And also the recent judgment of a this ArcelorMittal judgment. That is also a very interesting judgment with respect to the once a resolution plan is how the prospective bidders they challenge it. So there's a website called ibclaw.in. I'll request you to subscribe that for ibclaw.in and corplaw.blogspot.in. So when you will subscribe this to and follow it constantly like Live Law and Bar and Bench, you'll get a lot of knowledge in the recent development field of this law. So with this, I rest my address, and thanks a lot for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Ma'am.
Yeah, so thanks Vidya, and thank you Virus Jura for having us here today. I think it was also a very good experience for me because since this was my first time of interacting with such a huge group of people, but I think Devashish has pretty much covered as to what all efforts, as law students and as lawyers we can make towards, towards encouraging and towards, informing us about this whole process. So just go through a lot of these notifications and the case laws that come up that IBBI regularly comes up with. You can visit also the website of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. They keep coming up with a lot of innovative articles and everything that you can keep reading upon. If you're more interested, just go for some courses or just read through this entire code, and then whenever you finally as a law student, if you're a fresh applicant, if you go and want to practice with any law firm, you will always have an upper hand in knowing this entire process, because this is a very it's a very it's an upcoming legislation, and a lot of law firms and companies are interested about being more aware of this whole process. So just keep reading through it, and I hope we were able to make some contribution towards your knowledge of this entire fact. I hope you keep taking this forward. And thanks Vidya, thanks Devashish for being my co-host, and thank you Abhinav and Yash for giving us this opportunity. It was a great pleasure to be a part of this forum today.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So we are heartily thankful to our speakers as well as the participants for having such a wonderful and informative session. Thank you so much to our esteemed panelists for sharing their knowledge and enlightening each of us with their words of wisdom. It's a very great pleasure to listen from you, Mr. Devashish sir and Ms. Ayushi ma'am, on this topic. We are deeply thankful to you for taking your time out and imparting today's session, and also our teams will look forward for more sessions like that with you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. And
Yes,
on behalf
thank
of Juris Jura, thanks to all the and on behalf of Juris Jura, thanks to all the participants for participating in the webinar and making it a successful one. Thank you so much for your patience, participation, and your response. So, and we apologize and very sorry for the time constraint. So you shall email us your doubts and any questions, and we shall forward it to the sir and ma'am itself, and you can get it with answers. So I need to make some important announcement for the participants for availing the certificates. The certificate will only be provided to them who have attended the webinar session completely, that is yesterday and today's complete session. And the feedback link for the attendance will be circulated in the WhatsApp group or to your respective mail IDs after the end of the session. Kindly fill the required details for the attendance and certificate purpose. The certificate will be provided within a week or two through your email IDs. So I hope that the session was fruitful for all of you, and we shall be looking forward for organizing more such events for boosting up your enthusiasm in the legal field. Furthermore, we make sure that it will be a great pleasure for the law students as well as the legal fraternity to be a part of his organization. So stay connected with us to enlighten your legal knowledge and to feel the legal vibes. Thank you once again. Thank you once again, sir and ma'am, and all the participants for being with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.